guys, this is Justin. Hello and welcome to another video. So today I want to talk about the Republic's clone army, an army which was good enough to not only win the Clone Wars, I guess with a giant asterisk, but also almost wipe out the entire Jedi Order and serve as the first of Emperor Palpatine's new line of stormtroopers. But while clone troopers were phenomenal soldiers, among the best the galaxy had ever seen, I do still think there was room for improvement. Now, is there anything I would change when it comes to the frontline troopers? No, I think they pretty much nailed that. Jango Fett seems to be almost perfect as the genetic template for a combat soldier. The only thing is, that wasn't what the clones were solely doing. Now, the degree to which this is true in the real world or not, I don't know. I'm not a geneticist. However, in Star Wars, it's very clear that the big skills, piloting, droid making, are passed down directly through lineage, through genetics. In Star Wars Legends, for example, anyone with the last name Antilles, Solo, or Fell was pretty much guaranteed to be an ace starfighter pilot. And you can probably already see where I'm going with this. If the Republic's Navy was only going to be boots on the ground, or if they could only have one genetic template, Jango Fett's a good choice. However, aside from research cost, I see no reason why Jango Fett had to serve as the father for all clones, and in fact, in Star Wars Legends, that wasn't the case at all. In Legends specifically, the Kaminoan clones get all the attention, but there were other cloning methods which were used, including Spa'arti cloning. These clones were matured in a year and were thus significantly lesser quality than the Kaminoan clones. They were not effective in battle, or not as effective in battle, but they were more numerous and much cheaper to produce. However, as far as we know, these clones use the same prime template, that of Jango Fett, which is interesting, by the way, because often, especially in these really quickly grown clones, they're not only inheriting his genetics, but also some of his memories. You hear about flash training, that's kind of the general idea. Aside from like one-off aberrant clones, X1 and X2, for example, all the clones in the Grand Army of the Republic that we're aware of used Jango Fett. Now, quite interestingly, that wasn't the case with the Empire. One thing that's really interesting and really smart is that the Empire selectively chose high-ranking, or more importantly, high-performing Imperials to be the template for new clone soldiers. I think this is great because you're not only genetically screening for people likely to be good at the job, but you can also flash program clones with different sets of memory. And I'm sure the Republic was doing this to an extent, but the degree to which they should have specialized greatly outpaced what they were actually doing. Should Jango Fett, for example, have been the template for the clone starfighter pilots? I don't know. Sure, he kept up with Obi-Wan and he was definitely quite skilled, but had they went for somebody who was truly elite, I mean, maybe that could have made the difference. That's what Grand Admiral Thrawn did as well. He specifically also chose people within his fleet to flash clone through the Spa'arti method, and we also saw in the days of the Empire, and this is all from the Thrawn duology, that highly placed clones were actually set in sleeper cells across the galaxy. For example, the Baron Fell clones were ready to hop in a TIE interceptor and perform attacks should the signal go out. I will say, with the Galactic Republic, one reason why they probably chose to stay with just one clone template, and Jango specifically, was for reasons of secrecy. Jango was unique in that he was obviously incredibly skilled and gifted in all areas, but he could also be bought and paid for, and in Star Wars Legends in particular, he brought his Mandalorian culture with him, which heavily influenced the training of the clones and was probably a huge net positive overall. But especially when you move away from combat roles, I think the weakness of the method becomes even more evident. Like, does Jango Fett really need to be the template for the guy firing the artillery cannon? Surely there's somebody who can do it a little bit better. Does Jango need to be the template for the bridge technicians? In canon, I do think this will be something we'll see explored a little bit more in the Bad Batch Season 3. It's kind of interesting too, because the idea of clones making up a big portion of the Empire's military also does depend on whether you're reading Star Wars canon or Legends. In canon, they've actually, I'll say, been a little bit wishy-washy, but generally clone troopers are phased out pretty damn early, with conscripts instead making up the majority of clone ranks, and we've also seen, of course, Kamino being destroyed. The benefit of that is that when you're conscripting people, as I've talked about before, you're indoctrinating them, you're bringing their families sort of into the Imperial war machine, and all that is great for a totalitarian empire. In Star Wars Legends, it wasn't quite that. The clones kept being pumped out and were just in addition to the regular troops. When it comes to bioengineering and cloning, though, the faction that probably did it the very best was the Yuuzhan Vong. And that's no surprise because they didn't have technology as we think it. Everything they used, from their starships to their armor to their weapons, was grown. It was an organic being. They specifically would clone and alter the genetics of useful things, not just from their galaxy, but even in the Star Wars galaxy. The most prominent example of that would be the Voxen. The Voxen was just an absolutely horrendous creature. I've done an entire video on it. Basically, it's a cross between a Vornsker, which is a creature you'd be familiar with if you've read the Thrawn trilogy, and a creature native to the Yuuzhan Vong galaxy. It was a Jedi killer, and it was incredibly successful. So much so that the sacrifice of Anakin Solo and his brother Jason, or so they thought, was seen as, I mean, not great, but appropriate considering they destroyed the source of all Voxen in the galaxy. Anyway, I think if I were going to make my clone army, I'd want, 10 different genetic templates. You want your sniper, you want your frontline infantry, you want your starfighter pilot, you want your technicians. The list goes on and on. Either way, I think limiting it to one guy is a little bit silly, especially, as I mentioned, in a universe like Star Wars, where it seems like these traits and these skills are passed on so readily through genetics. Obviously, if you can find a way to harness the Force, that becomes even more important, but all Force cloning generally results in insanity. We see that with Jorah Sabayoth and the clone of Luke Skywalker. Starkiller, has some success, but generally it doesn't work. The Force overall doesn't like cloning. It doesn't like the really short cloning periods, especially. That's one thing Thrawn had to deal with when making his army of clones, and for that, he would end up using Isalamiri. I don't think they're going to go with clones again in the new canon Thrawn thing. Instead, they'll go with whatever he loaded on to the Star Destroyer, the Night Sisters, the Undead, whatever. But that's all I got for today. See you next time.